Good afternoon and welcome you all today's discussion on cardiovascular system questions solution class. So this is the fourth class. We'll discuss several questions today. So first questions of today's class is by which of the following features hypertrophic cardiomyopathy usually characterized? That is below the there is 5 options, and in between the 5 options we have to select one which characterizes more correctly about the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So the 5 options are asymmetric left ventricular hypertrophy with marked thickening of the interventricular septum. Good. It is actually asymmetric left ventricular hypertrophy is a feature of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, as well as there is marked thickening of the interventricular septum. Next, asymmetrical left ventricular hypertrophy with marked thickening of anterior left ventricular wall. Anterior left ventricular wall, actually hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, there is usually involvement of the interventricular septum usually, and hypertrophy of the both atria and both ventricle. Usually there is a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy usually involves the ventricle. There may be dilatation of the atria, but there is a cavity is less, becoming less in case of ventricle. Actually, due to hypertrophy, there is a cavity size becoming smaller, and hypertrophy of the left ventricle and atrophy of the right ventricle. There is actually no involvement of the right ventricle in case of hypertrophic. Maybe involvement, but there is not atrophy. There may be hypertrophy and maybe unchanged actually. There may be no changes in the right ventricle. There is maybe no involvement of the right ventricle. There is symmetrical left ventricular hypertrophy. Usually, this symmetrical left ventricular hypertrophy is a feature of actually hypertensive heart disease, or if there is a hypertrophy due to hypertension, long-standing uncontrolled hypertension, in that case, there is usually symmetrical left ventricular hypertrophy occurs. So I think this is the option A, that is asymmetric left ventricular hypertrophy with marked thickening of the interventricular septum is the more correct answer here. So let us recapitulate something about the interventricular septum. So the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy about. So in that hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, there is hypertrophy, initiation of the fetal gene program, there is metabolic shift, there is fibrosis may also occurs, interstitial and perivascular form. There may be end-stage heart failure may occur due to energy and functional imbalance. And there may be arrhythmia, there may be cardiomyocyte hypertrophy and disarray. And due to interstitial fibrosis, the arrhythmia may occur. And there is usually approximately 50% of the patients have mutations in one or more of the more than 20 sarcomeric genes. And diagnosis is made by increased left ventricular wall thickness, by echocardiography, by MRI, late gadolinium enhancement. There may be nuclear imaging, and CT or genetic screening may be needed to diagnose and confirm the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So next question is, what is the main mechanism of action of the simvastatin? We all know that simvastatin is a statin group, usually that decreases the cholesterol level of the blood. Actually, it reduces the serum cholesterol level, especially it reduces the total cholesterol level as well as LDL level, and maybe it decreases the triglyceride also, and it may increase the HDL level. So this simvastatin is one of the member of the statin group. So there are 5 options, there are 5 mechanisms, and now let us see what mechanism is fit for simvastatin. So bile acid sequestrant is a option here, and bile acid sequestrant, the simvastatin is not a bile acid sequestrant. There are other drugs that are bile acid sequestrant. Decreases hepatic HDL synthesis. No, It has no, usually it does not decreases the hepatic HDL synthesis, inhibits lipoprotein lipase, it not acts on the lipoprotein lipase. It decreases the intrinsic cholesterol synthesis, and this is the way actually. We all know that HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors are called as statins, and HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors. These are the group of drugs usually that decreases the intrinsic cholesterol synthesis by inhibiting the HMG-CoA reductase enzyme. And they be agonist of PPAR alpha, not usually not. So D decreases intrinsic cholesterol synthesis. Actually, this is the answer here, and this is the actually mechanism of simvastatin. And if we want to say more precisely that what is the action, how the action of the simvastatin or how the simvastatin works, so this is the answer is that it inhibits the HMG-CoA reductase enzyme. So by inhibiting the HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors, so it reduces the cholesterol synthesis. Actually, it reduces the intrinsic cholesterol synthesis. So this is the way how simvastatin works. And this is the third question, I think, cardiac transplantation. The question is about cardiac transplantation, and cardiac transplantation is considered in which group of patients with cardiomyopathy? That is here, cardiac transplantation, indication of cardiac transplantation is described in these questions. So there are 5 options. Let us see what are the options described here. Option A is asymptomatic patients. Actually, in medical science, nothing intervention and nothing drug, no drugs usually advised or indicated in any asymptomatic patients usually. So asymptomatic patients is not the correct answer here. The frail elderly patient with end-stage heart failure, end-stage heart failure may be an indication of the yes, cardiac transplantation, but frail elderly patients, actually they are not fit for the a huge big operation like cardiac transplantation actually. The patient who do not wish to take lifelong medication, actually this is not also the indication here. Patients who have poor quality of life despite optimal drug therapy, yes, this may be a more accurate answer. That is with optimal drug therapy, patients who have poor quality of life, that is the optimal medical therapy is not responding. This treatment optimal therapy is not responding enough. So patient has got symptoms yet. So he or she is the proper candidate to have a cardiac transplantation. Patients who have symptoms but quality of life on optimal drug therapy, good quality of patients who have symptoms but good quality of life, but no. If patients has optimal drug therapy and patients but good quality of life, patients actually who have symptoms but good quality of life on optimal drug therapy, usually good quality of life patient should not have actually this type of cardiac transplantation. So who have poor quality of life despite optimal drug therapy. So these are some indications of cardiac transplantation: cardiogenic shock requiring mechanical assistance, refractory heart failure with continuous inotropic infusions, progressive symptoms with maximal therapy, severe symptomatic hypertrophic or restrictive cardiomyopathy, medical refractory angina with unsuitable inotropic revascularization, and life-threatening ventricular arrhythmias despite aggressive medical and device interventions, cardiac tumors with low likelihood of metastasis, hypoplastic left hand, and complex congenital heart disease. Actually, these are the indications for cardiac transplantation. Now let us move to the next question. A 40-year-old woman with no significant previous medical history collapses while running a marathon. Despite attempts at resuscitation, she does not survive. Post-mortem examination reveals asymmetric left ventricular hypertrophy with disproportionate thickening of interventricular septum. So this is the features of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Actually, a post-mortem diagnosis of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy is made, yes. What is the most likely cause of this patient's sudden collapse? Why actually this patient get collapsed? So we should know actually what are the complications or consequence of a patient having hypertrophic cardiomyopathy actually, or what is the mode of death actually occurs in a patient suffering from hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So there are 5 options listed here. Those are the atrial fibrillation, this is the left ventricular failure, this is the pulmonary embolism, there may be right ventricular failure, there may be ventricular edema. If a patient has got atrial fibrillation, and actually atrial fibrillation doesn't cause sudden cardiac death actually, left ventricular failure, if a patient develops left ventricular failure, so patient actually don't have a sudden cardiac death. Patient may be succumb to death, but not at the same time when the left ventricular failure. It may need some time to actually to be dead. And pulmonary embolism, and actually pulmonary embolism is a not complication of the left ventricular hypertrophic cardiomyopathy at all. Actually, pulmonary embolism is not a consequence actually. So pulmonary embolism is excluded. Right ventricular failure actually it doesn't occur in case of left ventricular the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And ventricular arrhythmia, actually ventricular arrhythmia form in form of the ventricular tachycardia or in the form of the ventricular fibrillation. Actually, these are the actual cause of having sudden cardiac death actually. And usually a patient having a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy may be dead due to sudden development of the ventricular arrhythmia like ventricular fibrillation or ventricular tachycardia, especially in the form of ventricular fibrillation that can lead to the death of a person having hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So ventricular arrhythmia should be the answer here. So if we recapitulate that, what are the mode of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy death? So there may be sudden cardiac death due to ventricular fibrillation or any other type of malignant arrhythmia like VT or ventricular fibrillation, or the heart failure may be a cause of death, but it takes some time. Patient may develop a stroke, that is cardiovascular CVD, cerebrovascular disease, but it also takes some time actually. So sudden cardiac death due to ventricular tachycardia, ventricular fibrillation, actually this is the main cause of sudden cardiac death. Next, we move to the another question here. A 30-year-old woman has recently been diagnosed with dilated cardiomyopathy. So now the question is about the dilated cardiomyopathy. Is also another type of cardiomyopathy. Her diagnosis was made with echocardiography, which showed moderate left ventricular dilatation and impairment. So there should be some degree of ventricular dilatation, especially left ventricular dilatation, as well as there may be left ventricular function deterioration or left ventricular. There is a decrease in the function of the left ventricle that usually we see in the echocardiography. She has noticed herself becoming increasingly fatigued on moderate exertion. So she developed actually, she experienced some degree of shortness of breath or fatigueness on exertion. Her younger sister died suddenly the previous year, and she's very worried about the risk of sudden death. So this is the one type of dilated cardiomyopathy that actually runs in the family. So her another family member, his younger sister, got dead in the last year. Which of the following treatments is known to reduce the risk of her sudden death? So as she actually may have sudden cardiac death, so she fears about the sudden risk of sudden cardiac death. So what is the statement that known to reduce the risk of sudden death? So what are the treatment options that can reduce the risk of sudden death? There are 5 options there. Aspirin, yes, aspirin, maybe some degree, but this is dilated cardiomyopathy. This is not actually ischemic heart disease. In ischemic heart disease, aspirin has got some role to reduce the sudden cardiac. Actually, beta blocker, metoprolol, actually, metoprolol, beta blocker. In any case of patient having heart failure, actually, patient have some degree of protection, or some patient get benefit to reduce the risk of sudden cardiac death also. So beta blocker should be the answer here, especially metoprolol. There is a lot of study that prove the effectiveness of the beta blocker to reduce the risk of sudden cardiac death, especially in a patient having a lower ejection fraction, or that patient having heart failure. It may be due to dilated cardiomyopathy, they may be due to myocardial infarction, or any other types of ailments that can cause the reduced ejection fraction and left ventricular failure. So patient get benefited from having beta blocker or metoprolol. This calcium channel blocker, verapamil, actually verapamil should not be given in a patient having a low ejection fraction or a patient suffering from late ventricular failure or low ejection fraction. So loop diuretics furosemide. So furosemide is effective to reducing the symptoms of a patient having low ejection fraction or patients having heart failure. But the loop diuretics furosemide doesn't have any to have reduced the risk of sudden death. So loop diuretics doesn't have any role to reduce the risk of sudden cardiac death. And Parkinson's coronary intervention in case of dilated cardiomyopathy, actually this patient don't have any ischemic heart disease or don't have any atherosclerotic plaque, usually don't have any significant atherosclerotic plaque within their coronary arteries. So this patient don't have any benefit from this patient actually doesn't need any form of Parkinson's coronary intervention. They doesn't need actually no PCI. So in between the 5 options here, a beta blocker is the options to reduce the risk of sudden cardiac death. So beta blocker is the answer here. So here we have seen there are some evidence that describe the effectiveness of the beta blocker to reduce the sudden cardiac death here. If we want to know something of the dilated cardiomyopathy, there is dilatation and impaired contraction of the ventricles that lead to the having reduced systolic function without heart failure, characterized by myocyte damage, and there are multiple etiologies with similar resultant pathophysiology. Majority of the cases are idiopathic, so idiopathic majority of the cases are causology, etiology are unknown. In case of dilated cardiomyopathy, in 20 to 50% of cases, the disease is recognized as the familial. So in the previous scenario, we have seen that one of her sisters died from the same region, or maybe due to sudden cardiac death, having in the last year. So this may be a familial. Autosomal dominant inheritance is most commonly encountered, and mutation in several cardiac structural and metabolic genes have been identified. So beta blocker should be used in all patients with a reduced ejection fraction to prevent the symptomatic heart failure, even if they don't have a history of myocardial infarction. So beta blocker has definitely some role, like beta blocker or metoprolol is a member of the family of the beta blocker, and definitely they have some role to reduce the risk of sudden cardiac death. These are another questions. 55-year-old woman presents with a history of acute severe constricting central chest pain associated with anterior ST segment elevation of the 12-beta TCG. So this patient actually developed ST segment myocardial infarction. Immediately undergoes coronary angiography. So the patient shifted to cath lab for angiography, which shows no evidence of coronary artery disease, but this patient don't have any atherosclerotic plaque or any coronary artery disease and no coronary occlusion, but this patient has got ST elevation myocardial infarction. An echocardiogram shows left ventricular apical dilatation. There is a echocardiography a report shows ventricular apical dilatation with normal left ventricle basal contraction. There is a normal basal contraction, but there is a apical dilatation or apical thinning out or apical ballooning. It is also called apical ballooning, or there may be aneurysm-like dilatation in the apical segment of the left ventricle. Which of the following factors is most likely to have precipitated this illness? Actually, if we tell that what is the diagnosis actually in this case. Actually, this is a case of Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, is one kind of cardiomyopathy. This is called Takotsubo. And this Takotsubo cardiomyopathy usually have normal coronary arteries. And this is usually preceded by sudden severe emotional stress. Usually this type of disease is preceded by, but in angiogram, coronary angiogram, usually report is usually normal. Coronary arteries, but in echocardiography, usually see this, there is apical ballooning. So Takotsubo cardiomyopathy is also called apical ballooning syndrome, or it is also called broken heart syndrome. So, so what are the 5 following options? These are the acute emotional stress, cigarette smoking, excessive alcohol consumption, genetic factors, and viral infection. So we know from the Takotsubo cardiomyopathy or broken heart syndrome, we know that acute emotional stress, that is the most important precipitating factor that can cause the apical dilatation of the left ventricle or apical ballooning syndrome, or that can precipitate the Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. So option A is the answer here actually. So we all know that this is the normal heart, this is the Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. We all know that there is a dilatation on the apical segment, and there is normal functioning or normal contraction of the basal segment. There is enlarged left ventricle, and this actually the left ventricle swells and forms a shape like an octopus spot. This is actually called Takotsubo. In Japanese language, Takotsubo means that is octopus spot. So what is Takotsubo? Takotsubo is an acute cardiac syndrome which presents like acute coronary syndrome. So usually this patient are admitted in the CCU, and his or her ECG shows that ST elevation myocardial infarction, or there may be any changes in the ST segment or T segment or TOF. And tangent LV apical ballooning in the absence of coronary artery stenosis. There's also coronary angiogram is normal, but there is a transient LV apical ballooning, and this transient means usually this patient becomes normal after several hours actually, often preceded by acute emotional or physical stress, and this is also called the broken heart syndrome. So now we move to the next questions. You are a CT1 in acute medicine covering the hospital at night. You are called to the surgical ward to say 35 years old patient who is reporting palpitation. So this is a questions about the palpitations actually, and she is known to have old Parkinson-White syndrome. So this lady actually is suffering from the old Parkinson-White syndrome. Her ECG shows fast atrial fibrillation. So if a patient having WPW syndrome, they may present in several ways, or this may present in several types of actually different types of arrhythmia, like atrial fibrillation, like SVT, supraventricular tachycardia. Usually this patient may present, or maybe atrial flutter or atrial fibrillation. This is shows fast atrial fibrillation. On examination, there is no evidence of hemodynamic instability. That is, patient hemodynamic is stable, though she have fast atrial fibrillation. What is the most appropriate pharmacological management option for this disease? So what is the drug treatment here? Adenosine, verapamil, metoprolol, digoxin, and flecainide. So what is the most appropriate pharmacological management options here? As this patient is suffering from atrial fibrillation, and she don't have any hemodynamic instability, so drug treatment is enough in this case. Actually beta blocker is the actually in that cases if this patient has gotten a structural heart disease like mitral stenosis or in mitral regurgitation like or mitral valvular disease, in that case actually we choose the digoxin to reduce the rate. But if this patient don't have any structural heart disease and underlying cause of Parkinson-White syndrome, so in that case, metoprolol may be options here to reduce the fast atrial fibrillation rate actually. But if the patient has WPW syndrome and presented with supraventricular tachycardia, in that cases verapamil may work or adenosine may be given actually. So actually, this is the management of atrial fibrillation, breakthrough with rapid ventricular response. So this is a rate control strategy here. So no heart failure or hypertension or hypotension. Usually beta blocker or calcium blocker actually we choose. If patient has got heart failure or hypotension, in that case we choose actually amiodarone or digoxin. So this is the answer is beta blocker. That is metoprolol is the right answer of this question here. So now we should move to the next question. Next question is, which of the following is associated with excessive alcohol consumption? So excessive alcohol consumption is the cause of the disease of this actually described here. There are 5 options: atrial fibrillation, diverticulitis, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, hypotension, and supraventricular tachycardia. So atrial fibrillation, usually excessive alcohol consumption causes dilated cardiomyopathy, as well as this patient may have hypotension. Atrial fibrillation may occur, but due to dilated cardiomyopathy or due to any type of cardiomyopathy associated with or presented with any form of arrhythmia, so atrial fibrillation may be a cause. Diverticulitis, maybe hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, no association, hypotension, yes, that may be the answer here. Supraventricular tachycardia, actually, supraventricular tachycardia is not the answer. So atrial fibrillation and hypotension, that may be the 2 probable answer here. So if we gone through this actually features of having alcohol in a large dose, or a patient having alcoholic heart disease, that is cardiomyopathy, arrhythmia, heart attack and stroke, hypertension, and anemia. So arrhythmia, that is a atrial fibrillation actually is the answer here. And atrial myxoma is the most common, next question actually, atrial myxoma is the most common primary cardiac tumor. You all know that atrial myxoma is the most common primary cardiac tumor. Which of the following is true of atrial myxoma? So there are 5 statements about the atrial myxoma. So which one? We have to pick the best answer about the atrial myxoma. Atrial myxoma are usually malignant. Usually, actually, atrial myxomas are benign tumor. It occurs more commonly in the right atrium than in the left atrium. It is not true. Actually, we see that myxoma more occurs in the left atrium. Actually, usually we call it left atrial myxoma. Actually, surgery is not integrated because atrial myxoma are benign. But though atrial myxoma are benign, but usually they are actually embolized. As their due to embolization, patient may have a chance of having CVD, or there may be occlusion of the limb, or there may be occlusion of the any peripheral arteries that can lead to the permanent damage of that organ. So surgery actually urgently indicated in case of atrial myxoma, though atrial myxoma are benign, and surgery is usually indicated to prevent the embolic complications. Yes, this is the answer here. Surgery is usually indicated to prevent the embolic complications such as a stroke. So it is urgently indicated. This is the acute emergency surgery actually needed to a patient. And if a patient diagnosed atrial myxoma, this patient should be transferred to the cardiac surgery unit as early as possible to prevent the embolic phenomenon actually. The tumor commonly obstructs the aortic valve. Usually the tumor not actually obstruct the aortic valve, as usually this tumor arises from the late atrium. So this tumor is usually, when it is large enough, then it passes through the mitral valve to the left ventricle. So it obstructs the mitral valve actually, and this actually produces some mid-diastolic murmur that may resemble the mitral stenosis also. So the tumor usually obstructs the mitral valve, not the aortic valve. So that describes the surgery is usually indicated to prevent the embolic complications such as stroke. Actually, this is the answer here. So these are something about the myxoma. The classic clinical presentation of myxoma in the intracardiac obstruction with congestive heart failure, that's intracardiac obstruction that obstructs the mitral valve. Signs of embolization in case of 29% actually with, so there is a high rate of embolization in case of myxoma usually. So this patient should be transferred to the surgery unit for the immediate surgery as early as possible. Systemic unconstitutional symptoms like fever, malaise, weight loss or fatigue may be present. Immunological manifestations of myalgia and weakness, and their patient may present arthalgia also, and there may be also cardiac rhythm disturbance, and infection occurs less frequently. Cardiac rhythm disturbance may occur as it obstructs actually the valve. So the next question is, a 53-year-old man is reviewed in the cardiology clinic with a history of chest pain and syncope. On examination, he has an ejection systolic murmur radiating to the carotid area. What is the most likely cause of his symptoms? So this patient is 53 years old. He has a history of chest pain and syncope. On examination, chest pain and syncope with a ejection systolic murmur radiating to the carotid area. So if we just recapitulate the ejection causes of ejection systolic murmur that radiating to the aortic area, and patient has a history of chest pain and syncope. So aortic stenosis actually is the main cause to having an ejection systolic murmur, as well as the aortic stenosis patient. When there is a severe form, they usually present with the chest pain, and patient may have the features of syncope also. So patient, what is the most likely cause? Bicuspid aortic valve is maybe an answer, because bicuspid aortic valve usually causes aortic stenosis. Aortic root abscess. Aortic root abscess usually causes aortic regurgitation, or then in the form of aortic stenosis. Post-pneumatic fever, yes, post-pneumatic fever can cause aortic stenosis as well as aortic regurgitation also. Post-traumatic infarction, yes, post-traumatic MI can usually cause the damage of the myocardium, not involved in the valve, and that usually doesn't cause an ejection systolic murmur. And calcification of the aortic valve, usually calcification of the aortic valve may produce some degree of aortic regurgitation or mild aortic stenosis. But maybe calcification of the aortic valve may cause the severe aortic stenosis in the elderly years. But bicuspid aortic valve should be the answer here. So from this slide, there are some features having actually the features of aortic stenosis. There is a radiation to the carotid actually in case of aortic stenosis. So next question, which of the following condition may resulting in chronic pericardial constriction? Actually, what are the causes of chronic pericardial constriction? I think that is the produces chronic pericarditis or constrictive pericarditis. So we should have recapitulate the causes of chronic constrictive pericarditis. Acute myocardial infarction doesn't cause the chronic pericardial constrictive pericarditis. Dilated cardiomyopathy doesn't cause. Excessive alcohol consumption doesn't cause the chronic constrictive pericarditis. Osteoarthritis not a cause. Tuberculosis, yes, tuberculosis can cause the addition of the 2 layers of the pericardium that can cause the constrictive pericarditis actually. So tuberculosis is the cause here. And if we gone through some points about the chronic constrictive pericarditis, the tuberculosis constrictive was the common cause of constriction in the pre-1960 decline in incidence. Though it was a common cause in the previous years, but due to a decreased incidence of the tuberculosis in the developed and developing countries, actually it is a decline in incidence over the time. Post-radiotherapy constriction, it may occur as nowadays radiotherapy is a common cause that may also lead to the development of the constrictive pericarditis today with the post-surgical causes, especially the post-radiotherapy to the bronchogenic carcinoma or the breast cancer. Needs to be differentiated from restrictive cardiomyopathy when making diagnosis. Yes, there should be some differential diagnosis of the constrictive pericarditis with restrictive cardiomyopathy. So when you consider constrictive cardiomyopathy, we should have always keep in mind about the restrictive cardiomyopathy also. So this is the actually classification as well as some etiology of the constrictive pericarditis. So here we see that tuberculosis. The tuberculosis is the one of the important cause of constrictive pericarditis. So the answer here is the tuberculosis that can cause the chronic constrictive pericarditis. So we should move to the next question. A 75-year-old male smoker presents with a 6-week history of progressive exertional breathlessness and fatigue. Latterly, he has noticed his ankle swelling in the afternoon. So yeah, he had ankle swelling. On examination, pulse is 100 beats per minute and regular. That is, patient is tachycardic. Blood pressure is 92 by 60 millimeter. So patient is hemodynamically unstable. JVP is elevated and rises on inspiration. So JVP raised. Heart sounds are quiet and there are no added sound. There is bilateral pitting edema to the knees and a chest X-ray is requested, which shows apparent cardiomegaly with a globular cardiac shiroti. You suspect a possible pericardial effusion, which of the following statements true? So these are actually the features of pericardial effusion that can have in X-ray cardiomegaly. There is a globular cardiac shiroti, and in the patient having the pericardial effusion, patient may have raised JPP, patient may have blood pressure, hemodynamically unstable. Actually, a patient having pericardial effusion, when a patient having hemodynamically unstable, there is patient having tachycardia. We should always suspect this patient have a pericardial tamponade actually. So we must to see if the patient has any features of pericardial tamponade, by seeing it should seen by echocardiography actually. So these are the some 5 statements here. So which of the following is true? The first statement is a large effusion can be a sign of malignancy. Maybe actually it may occur at a large effusion can be a sign of malignancy. Yes, it may have. A pericardial rub is always hard if the effusion is large. No, a pericardial rub is usually seen when the pericardial effusion is small actually. And this is the best investigation to confirm the diagnosis. No, echocardiography actually is the best investigation to confirm the diagnosis of the pericardial effusion. High-dose diuretic therapy will resolve the pain. No, actually, in that case of pericardial effusion, there is a minimum role of diuretic actually. Even it is in the high dose, there is actually there is a minimum role. In symptomatic patients, cardiac surgery is required to remove the pericardial fluid. Yes, if the patient has got symptoms as well as patient develop pericardiac tamponade, cardiac surgery is required. But usually cardiac surgery we don't do. Either malignancy is not suspected, but we do tapping of the pericardial fluid by just a needle. So a large effusion can be a sign of malignancy. I think this is the correct answer here. These are the regular symptoms of the patients having pericardial effusion. Patient may present with dyspnea, pleuritic type of chest discomfort, cough, fatigue, hoarseness, hiccup, syncope, concerns for tamponade. If a patient have pericardial effusion and patient going to syncope, we should always consider this patient may develop cardiac tamponade. Symptoms are most commonly associated with rapidly accumulating effusions. Physical exam findings reveals normal physical exam most common unless cardiac tamponade is present. Cardia is the most common findings can be present without tamponade. Hypotension is a feature of cardiac tamponade. Muffled heart sound may occur when there is a large pleural effusion, pericardial effusion, elevated JVP, yes, and pulsus paradoxus. When there is pulsus paradoxus, actually there is we should suspect this patient should have a cardiac tamponade. So these are management of moderate to large pericardial effusion. So usually we draw the fluid even in case of cardiac tamponade by needle aspiration actually. This is the next question. An 80-year-old man present with sudden onset of sudden severe chest pain. The pain is made worse by deep inspiration, lying down flat. It is relieved by sitting forward and taking shallow breaths. He presents to the emergency department and this is recorded because the attending doctor suspects acute pericarditis. What is the most specific? This is a change in pericarditis. So actually this is the scenario of a patient having pericarditis. So what are the scenario? The young patient may have pericarditis and this patient may have sudden onset of chest pain. This is the pleuritic type of chest pain. And this is made worsen by deep inspiration, as this pain can causes the 2 layers of the pericardium comes together and the pain may be worse. It is relieved by sitting forward and taking shallow breaths. He pains to the marsupial. It is recorded. So, what is the most species change in pericarditis? PR interval prolongation, and may not be PR segment depression. Yes, this is actually more specific for a patient having pericarditis. So, PR segment depression is suggestive of a patient having pericarditis. ST depression, ST elevation, TF inversion. ST elevation may occur in the ST elevation may occur in a patient having infarction or acute pericarditis. But PR segment depression is more suggestive of having acute pericarditis, and it is very much suggestive that this patient has got acute pericarditis. So here we see that there is a reciprocal PR segment elevation and depression. This is a PR segment depression. A PR segment depression, actually this is the features of acute pericarditis. Even this patient have ST elevation also. Now I think this may be the last questions to be discussed today. A 46-year-old man has recently fractured his leg, which is in a plaster cast. He suddenly becomes very breathless and collapse. The attending doctor suspects a pulmonary embolus from a deep vein thrombosis. Usually, patient having deep vein thrombosis usually has the history of prolonged immobilization due to fracture of his legs, or usually it may occur in a gynecological department or in a surgical department or in a orthopedic department where there is a prolonged immobilization may occur or prolonged immobilization may be suggested. So usually it occurs due to prolonged immobilization. There is a deep vein thrombosis, and deep vein thrombosis can embolize, and that can cause the pulmonary embolism. And the doctor performs an ECG. What is the most common ECG change in patients with pulmonary embolism? This is anterior TF inversion, atrial fibrillation, S1Q3T3 as actually the most common ECG change that describe the features of pulmonary embolism is on S1Q3T3. It is called S1Q3T3. S1Q3T3 always suggests the patient may have pulmonary embolism. There may be sinus tachycardia, ST elevation, that everything can may happen or may be present in a patient with pulmonary embolism, but S1Q3T3 is the suggestive of pulmonary embolism. So there is a S1Q3T3, S1 is that the S1 in the lead one, S1Q3 there is a Q, a T3 that suggests the patient may have pulmonary embolism. This is a S1Q3T3, and up to 50% patient may have these features with a pulmonary embolism. So this is the findings in pulmonary embolism, or this is S1Q3T3. This is more suggestive to having the pulmonary embolism. There may be some other features like right ventricular strain, right axis deviation, dominant RO in V1, right atrial enlargement corpulmonally, atrial tachydysarrhythmias, complete or incomplete right bundle branch block, sinus tachycardia, and on-speak ST segment TF changes. That can have, the patient can have or any one of these features of a patient having pulmonary embolism. So I think we can stop here today. And in the next class, we'll inshallah discuss several other questions of the cardiovascular system. So thank you very much, and good night to you all. So have a good night.